Okay, so my name's John, also called Lone Outlander here on the server, and I was talking to Austin about how we can improve the speed and accuracy of our dialogue mapping. And there's a couple of different techniques and tools that we've used. So I wanted to go ahead and sit down and take a look at some of these and give you an idea of how I do it to see if maybe it would be more helpful to you going forward. So I've got a couple of different things open here in my primary browser window. I've got the Fallout Wiki here. I've got the page for the character I'm working on, who is Sulik, one of our possible companions. I like looking at his particular system right now simply because it's the one that I've just finished up, the initial scrub, and it also is, he's an NPC companion, so there's a lot of different types of interactions that are involved. Okay. The reason I like to have the wiki page up is because I'm able to kind of go through and take a look at the different aspects of the character in terms of his responses, his his quests, things like that. You can see that he does have a talking head, so this means that he's going to be available for some of that custom face dialogue that we see in Fallout 2. So that means that there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. It also gives us some explanations about how he behaves. So we can see here, Sulik will disband or refuse to join if your town reputation in Klamath is hated. If you become a child killer, berserker, your karma falls below 100, or negative 100, excuse me, that is an important thing. Slavers, or attacking anyone in Klamath, which would lead to the hated trigger as well. So there's a number of different things here. We've got some different aspects here about the low intelligence characters, which is something that we're trying to make a very strong presence for. So we'll see that he can actually join us if we're low intelligence. That's not a very common thing for the companions so far. Now we can go through combat as well, because there are some things in the dialogue that are going to fall into. Now there is something that I have borrowed from here that wasn't specifically canon, and that is the name of his sister Kurisu. So I went ahead and made sure that I listed that in my notes. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this window down, and we're going to take a look at a couple of the things I'm working with here. So on the right, I have the Sfall Script Editor. So if you have not used this before, very useful piece of equipment to have, because we're taking the original .int file that was in the game. So if we unpacked the archive and got the INTs, we could then convert it into the SSL. We can also pull out the .msg files, the .message files. Great thing about Sfall is that it does a lot of this visual color coding for us to make it easier to read what's there. So when I go through, one of the things that I take a look at is the include statements. So this is written in C++ using the Wacom microprocessor / compiler, I believe. So with this, the include statement basically says these are things that we're going to pull references from. We're going to include items that are in define.h, klamath.h, and Klamath downtown.h. That's what the KLADWTN is. We're also going to define a couple of local variables, names stated here. So if you remember, I told you just a second ago that the disband thing was when your karma around Sulik went below negative 100 points. That's actually defined as a constant here that you'll be able to use. Town rep var, basically this is the town rep variable to measure your reputation in Klamath as regards Sulik. The name is going to refer to the script here. We've got KC Sulik as our script. K basically means the Klamath area. C is code for critter. So whenever you see KC, you know that it is a living thing in the Klamath area. Critter is the general term they use for NPC people as well as for mobs. Okay. We also have a couple of other headers, the command, mod react, and party background.h. So those are the .header files for those. I'm not going to pull those up just now to look at, but the idea is when you're going through, if you have these open, if you see some different variables that don't seem to make sense, that's a good location to start checking. Excuse me. So now we're going to take a look at a couple of the procedures. These procs basically handle specific methods in the operation of the script. So when we use the destroy p proc, that removes the target of the method from the game space. So if Sulik dies, we're probably going to be looking at destroy p.proc. That's another thing that's really handy with Sfall, is that we have tooltips, these little screen pops that come up. So it says here, handler destroy p.proc is called when the self object is destroyed. If we go to map enter, that's going to say when the player enters the map what is going to happen. So we're going to go ahead and identify some various aspects of behavior based on these methods. Script specific, we're going to see that we've got some stuff that are particular to this SSL beyond what's in there from the designer tool. You'll notice that node 998 is always listed as combat, and node 999 is always the dialogue end. You'll notice also these little double slashes, or this slash asterisk or asterisk slash closer. These are what are called line comments and block comments. These are essentially things that are supposed to be excluded from the actual execution of the script and are instead used as kind of a 25-year-old version of version control, showing us how the revisions would be going, how certain things would be no longer used. So now we get into the designer tool, we can see the bulk of the nodes that are going to be set up. So the node system is basically just going to be this branching sequence of triggers that goes from one piece to the other in order to give us a sequence of dialogue contextually based on the responses of the player as well as conditions that exist in the game, you know, reputation, intelligence, the amount of money you have, etc. We've got some more variables down here. You'll notice that these are not capitalized, so I don't believe these are referred to as constants. These are instead just quick define, what looks to be quick define methods. So we can see here, dude has free slot for Sulik, dude at max party size equal false. This is a shortcut that Interplay used. Whenever they say dude, they're talking about the player. You know, they can specify that the dude is female, so dude looks like a lady. I'm sure they had a bunch of giggles about that at the development center. So let's see here, party member options. We're going to go to N option. You're going to see a couple of these. Whenever you see this kind of yellowish lettering, this indicates a particular type of method call, and it has a parameter list inside. If you highlight the method, we can actually look at what it's supposed to be. So the void in the front is what's supposed to be returned. Whenever you have a return, at the end of the method, it's supposed to give you something back. If there's a void, it means there is no return. It's an option that just executes. 3070 is the message number in the attached script file. Node 26 is the intended target. So if Sulik party member options is called, when it executes, it's going to display the message number 3070 and then launch node 26. 004 is an IQ test, so that means that we're checking to see that the player has an IQ of at least this particular amount. We'll see that there's a couple of options that seem to be related. I haven't yet figured out why there's a what's called a GIQ option, which allows us to have some choices based on the intelligence quotient again, and then there's low options for low intelligence, and then there's the N option here with the IQ test flag. So there's a couple of different items. You'll notice that the N option means that it's a neutral emotional response. You'll also see G option and B option, so good emotional response and bad emotional response. We've got some local variables. These are variables that are specifically saved to Sulik, so that as we go through his scripts, we know whether or not we've carried over certain conditions. If any of you played RPG Maker or something similar, you'll remember the term switch, basically saying that this particular variable has been changed by events in the game. So node 26 has a variable called lvar underscore 26 before, and the idea is if you have visited node 26 and gone through the execution sequence, that means that there will be different dialogue if you talk to Sulik again and trigger node 26. Same thing with 69, 81, 57. All of these will essentially be, there's dialogue when you first speak to him about this, and then there's dialogue after that first time. Some of the ones I want you to also pay attention to are the never again, who's we, and the personal enemy ones. These are ones that are going to come up quite a bit simply because there are a lot of conditions under which if you push the line too far, Sulik will consider you his enemy. There is a difference between hostile and personal enemy in terms of how quickly combat will trigger if you stay in proximity to Sulik. Never again, as far as I can tell, is basically him saying, I will never work with you again. That's the idea. There may be map variables. These are usually going to be locations, not characters. So mvar and lvar, map and then local. Local variables that do not need to be saved between map changes will be listed just as variable in order to make sure of something being taken care of as need be. Now we get past this little declaration area, we can see that we have some methods that are what are called folded. This is where we can collapse them in order to make it easier to scroll through the document. So if I scroll down towards the bottom real quick, you'll see that the comments currently are not foldable. In certain IDEs or integrated development environments, you can fold comments, which I'm going to show you again in just a second in Notepad. Excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and fold 915 just to show you how it's done. So we go from line 554 to 567, folds right down. Now 554 continues to 568. These were written reasonably sequentially, but there are some things that jump around a little bit. You'll notice here like nodes 9, 17, 18, and 19. If we scroll up just a tick and take a look at the stuff before the designer tool, these are script-specific procedure calls. So those items are going to be chilling out before we start looking at the stuff for the designer tool. If we look over here on the left in the procedures bar, you'll see that tracks. You'll see that 910 cuts through up to 999 and then starts at 001. So let's go ahead and move down towards the actual nodes that we'd be looking at for interaction with Sulik. So node 001 is going to say procedure node 001 begin. Whenever we have a procedure, we're going to have a begin and an end. Inside of that, we will have some material that passes. In certain cases, you might have what's called a null procedure, where it doesn't have anything going on. It's just a procedure that gets called, and it acts as a terminator in a way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my Notepad++ instance, and I'm going to look here on the right-hand side. So as you can see, I've got a lot of stuff already texted out that I have written in. So I took the original .msg file and saved it as Casey Sulik _PA, just flagging it for Project Arroyo so I know it's the one that I've modified. And then I am going to take a look here. Now this is a predefined language that I have gone in and made. I have taken some of the steps that would normally be present in the C++ markup for this document, and I have converted it just a bit to where it plays just for the stuff that we see in the .message folder. So I'm going to go over here to View, and I'm going to go to Unfold All, which is Alt-Shift-0. And what I've done is I've actually tried to reformat some of this stuff just a little bit. So I've gone in and I've made some changes to how the formatting is up top. This stuff that was commented wasn't here. These method calls were not here. And the reason I did it is because I wanted to be able to quickly identify different sections of the script, as well as being able to expand and contract them as necessary to make it easier to, again, to locate things, to figure out the pathway that I was going on, and to make sure that I was paying attention to my details. Because if I did not have this .endm or a £end at the end of my method, if I remove that, you notice all of a sudden the line right here where my cursor is goes from stopping here to going all the way to the end of the document itself, because there's no end statement for it to come into. So this uses a pretty standard, I believe, JavaScript-based push-pop stack in order to define the beginning and ends of these method calls, if you will. So again, I mean, in language, I've got FO2 language in the message bracket here. I'm working on the one for the SSL. I have this updated and uploaded into our Trello so that way you can download it and use it with Notepad++ if you wish. If you go to User-Defined Language, you can go to Define Your Language, and you can go to Import. I have it in my Fallout folder here, and it's 6 kilobytes. It's not very big. So here I've got a block statement comment. Basically just gives me the block up top of some things that I felt were important that I pulled from the wiki. So I went ahead and got his special stats if for any reason I needed that. I haven't needed them so far, but there are certain skill checks that may require that you have a strength check against him, and it may be based on his specials. Again, flagging that 998 and 999 are always the combat and end dialogue. Slavery tolerance, I believe, I'll have to check the define.h because I think that's where that's put in, but the higher the number, the less tolerant they are. Because Sulik himself is a slave, and because his sister was taken by slavers, I believe his is the maximum resistance to slavery possible. Affiliation is with the Klamath individuals. I believe they were also going to use one called the Primitive Tribe, but they did not incorporate those into the final game. That may be something that we do. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to Austin about that one in particular. And he does have an AI style. I know that we have something similar in the creation engine for setting a particular type of AI. I imagine if he's a tough citizen, that means that he's going to be in more of an aggressive stance. There are a couple of things that I put in just as personal notes. I tried to comment any dialogue lines that were not used out, so they're listed. We have the correct workflow of where they go. And I also was a little bit concerned about the fact that Sulik is very much a Jamaican stereotype. He calls everyone friend without the D, and he says, I and I, or we and I, excuse me, because he's in touch with the spirits. He really likes smoking weed. So there's a couple of things that make me a little concerned, but again, it's I guess just me being gun shy after what happened with the Frontier. So we've got the description proc here. What this does is whenever we actively examine a particular individual, description pproc is called. So it just says here you see Sulik. So if we put that here, look at P is when you pass the cursor over an object, so it's a cursory examination, if you'll forgive the pun. Here's one of our local variables. If second look equals 0, we're going to go ahead and set second look so that way we're looking at Sulik. For the first time, we get description of who he looks like, and then we get, it's just, hey, there's Sulik, once we look at him the second time. Push proc, I'm not sure how we're going to incorporate pushing. I don't know how we're doing that so far, but this is basically, if you're trying to occupy the same square that he's in, and you try and shove forward, he's actually going to give you some random responses in here. So here's our dialogue. It's just random L 2300 to 2307. So between this range, we're going to pull one random object out of this. So in the creation engine, I believe we have a random tree that we can set in at the end of that particular speech sequence. We've got party member options here, which is one that you pull for pretty much every companion. I put in target equals node 26. So what this is dialogue that the chosen will speak, line 3070, and it says, Sulik, can you consult the spirits for me? And target is node 26. So if I wanted to see where that goes, because of how I've done my documentation and commenting here, I can scroll through all this down to node 26, and when we call through, he will either say, spirits are willing to talk, what do you want? Or in certain cases, I think they may say that there's a check that says, spirits don't want to talk right now. And based on spirits being willing to talk, if your intelligence is below 4, you've got 3 responses. You've got n, and nuh-uh. If you say nuh-uh, then obviously that's going to be an end trigger. It's going to cut dialogue out, kind of like never mind. We see never mind a lot in Fallout 4. With and nuh, we've got 26A and B, so we've got some subnodes here. So what I'm going to do is go down to the A and B subnode. Whenever I have a subnode, so it's 26A, B, C, whatever it is, I put it inside the primary node, just so I always have that main flag to be able to jump back to. And when I fold that node, the subnodes get folded with it, which is handy. I listed as only having one subnode because 26A and B, if I go into Sfall here, let me scroll down, 26A and 26B, the text is exactly the same. Like, exactly. So, other than the name being slightly different. So I'm not sure why they have those two separate ones, but the idea is that you're just calling for a luck check. If the luck check is passed, you get some Zen proverbs. I'm sorry, if the passed, you get to node 27, which is the context-based dialogue. If you get a fail, you get these weird Zen proverbs at node 62, and I'll show you what those are in just a little bit. Node 27 I like to reference here because this basically talks about how Sulik will reference virtually everything that goes on geographically in the main areas of the game. So if we're in the Arroyo village, the bridge, or the caves, he'll give us this section here. If we go to the bridge after it's been destroyed, we've got this section here. If we've got Klamath, it's here. If we've got the Den, Gecko, Modoc, Vault City. And it's usually something that's somewhat helpful. So if we see Arroyo Bridge 86, for those of you who have not played the game, the Enclave captures the residents of Arroyo and takes them to the oil rig. So it says here, Grampy Bones say they all standing on the Great Water. Doesn't make sense to we and I either. So Grampy Bone, I'll pull up his wiki real quick, is the spirit that is possessing the giant bone in Sulik's nose. So in that bone, he carries the spirits of his ancestors, and Grampy Bone is the strongest of those spirits and is the one that talks to him. So that's the one that he consults when you ask him to consult the spirits. You'll see here he talks about, Grampy Bone say this place full of bad people, etc. Klamath, he doesn't talk a whole lot about, simply because you meet him in Klamath, so he'll talk specifically about things inside of the different buildings, but not about the general location. If you go down here, we've got some non-documented materials. San Francisco and the EPA, these are both items that have been excised as cut content for the game. If we re-add them, then we already have this documentation ready to go, so we know what his context-based information is in these two sections. There's the Mariposa base, there's the NCR, there's Vault 15, there's Navarro, so a lot of different pieces here. We've also got the primitive tribe area and the Abbey, not really covered, but possibly going to be there. We've got a response here, which again I've tried to flag with the term responses. Target is N1000, which is I believe our party options, and then the dialogue that the Chosen speaks, which is okay, thanks. The way I always try and arrange it is the dialogue that Sulik speaks is going to be first, I'm going to have responses, and then I'll have my conditionals underneath of that. We've got some nodes that were entirely commented out, but there are some references that come in later on for those, so we may or may not use them. They may be useful to us, so I wanted to go ahead and arrange them and make sure that the message file was clear. Something else I did that just made my life a little bit simpler is, in certain cases, if the dialogue line was really long, you might see it written more like this, to where the line kind of continues on the next section. So I just went ahead and backed that up and made sure it was all one line where possible. I also tried to, wherever I would set these .def or these .def markers, to give you the node, I would also include some kind of description about what's going on, so that way, if I go ahead and fold everything, let me go to View, Fold All, I can still see some information about these different methods. So I can be like, okay, what's going on with, oh, I'm a child killer, so Sulik's going to reject me. I'm going to set the variable Elvar never again equal to 1. Whenever you're talking about stuff in C++, 0 traditionally means false or no. 1 means true or yes. So never again equals true means that Sulik is now stating that he will never work with you again. So the dialogue states, no way we be friends with child killer. There is a copy of this line in node, this is from a different node, line 923. So part of this is, it seems like there's multiple individuals who are writing these scripts and may have been working on them in kind of a round-robin fashion. And that's okay, but we just want to make sure that we're eliminating redundancy where possible so we don't have to record the same line 24 times. Set self-abandoned party, which is a method that we will call later on. I like to try and indicate that by putting double parentheses at the end, open and close, so that we indicate that that is a method of some kind. And then NPC join team Klamath. Teams and affiliations are basically how we identify who belongs where, what faction they're a part of. So if I were to shoot a member of the Brotherhood Steel in the head, the rest of the Brotherhood of Steel would probably be mad. Anybody who's affiliated with them or feels that they are a positive influence would probably also be unhappy with that. It affects who gets angry about certain things. If you have companions that prefer negative karma, those will obviously prefer less salubrious acts, where more lawful companions would be less happy about that. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about how all this is structured, because we've looked at most of the ones that really kind of stand out. Obviously, as you can see, whenever we open a node, we have Sulik's line, responses, we've got conditionals, and I try and group those together. We're going to have things like if, then, and else. So if we establish here, if player intelligence less than 4, else, that means player intelligence is greater than or equal to 4. So that means that it's considered to be standard intelligence. We've got our if else here, if end. If you see end, basically it's just ending the previous if. So you'll notice there's kind of a dotted line that goes between them to indicate where the different methods have what are called scope. So we can shrink that down. I also have some conditional statements here that are compound. So you can see here there's a difference between and inside of the parentheses and here in the comments. You can see that its emphasis on all caps means that in order for something to be true, both of these conditions have to be true. Okay, so that's what's called a compound conditional. I don't know if you guys have dealt with those before. I could definitely spend 20-30 minutes giving you a quick primer on discrete mathematics, but that's not the goal today. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save what I've got. So we can see that I've taken the dialogue that we've already gotten, and I've tried to attach it where possible to the script that it comes from. So I spend a lot of time with this kind of side-by-side going on, to where I'm like, okay, node 88. Let me go ahead and scroll over here on the side. I'm going to jump over to 88, and I'm going to find, okay, reply 3055. So there's 3055 right there. And then I've got my good and bad options that I can put in. So let's see. I've got an option I missed. Hey, I'm glad I pointed this one out. So let me show you what I would do. Let me go ahead and move this one over to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and go down here to 3054. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go here. My target is N999, which is going to be my end. Make sure that you're closing your parentheses, because otherwise the system is going to think with this SSL language format, or this message language format, that the everything at the end of the parenthesis is going to stay in until it hits an end statement. So I'm going to hit close, and then I'm going to go ahead and bring in line, let's see, should be L3054, so I'm going to target that there. I'm going to do a search real quick, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find it. Okay, so L354 is right here. It's a OK. Now because it's so short, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. For longer lines, I may have just left in a reference to what the line was. So the find statement is going to be really handy for you, so make sure that you're jumping around and make sure you catch everything. Something that I will show you that may be more helpful to compare this might be, let me go ahead and go to KC Sulik. Let me get the original. Okay, so this is what it looks like before I start doing all of my formatting. You can see that it looks a lot less colorful. There's some strange things that kind of jump up in terms of highlighting, and that's because the keywords that I use will also show up. So like a try-catch statement, the word catch will get highlighted. So it's a lot harder to read because there's no breakup of where the nodes are, there's no breakup of where duplicate stuff might be, or where dialogue that's not being used is. So let me show you an example here. If I go down here to, let me see, let me find something that's not used. Commented out. Okay, so we've got 921 and 922. So if I go here and I go to the find and I go to 922, we'll see that it says, Sulik node 73B. So it says that it's in there. All right. So let me go ahead and go over here, and I'll do the find inside of Sfall 922. And now, as I'm searching through, I can find, hey, this is commented out. And that's the only place that it shows up. Okay, so that means that when I go over here and I make my little notations, I'm going to go ahead and list that this is commented out in the SSL. I'm going to leave it alone because I can explain what it is. It may be something we can use. I'm going to include, self-abandoned party that we've got here. It also has script that says party remove self-object, but some of that's redundant. Again, the carryover to the creation kit is not going to be exact. So I want to make sure that I'm conveying the idea of what's getting done, maybe a little bit of technical language, but not a lot. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize Sfall, maximize my window here again. So you may have noticed I've got this little list over here. It says ambiguous target nodes. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit so it's easier to read. And the idea here is that I am trying to make sure that as I go through my little tree of dialogue that I'm going to show you in FreePlane in just a moment, I want to make sure I identify areas where the nodes only go one place, very closed pieces of the branch. So let's go ahead and pull up kcsulik.message. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that over, and I'm going to leave that up here. And I've got my this is my mind map. Now, for those of you who haven't used FreePlane before, it is just kind of a drag and drop software. If I go down here to kcsulik.message, that's my start node. If I hit insert, it will give me a brand new node. I want them all to be on one side, so what I do is I traditionally just hit enter on the node that I'm already on. Okay, so let me go ahead and delete this one over here. I do not want to use that. What I'll normally do is I will go ahead and take the script, the SSL and the .message file, and get all of that commenting done first. I will not do anything in mindmap until I have a full document listing here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to view, make sure I've got fold all, everything's nice and tight. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and slide my text over just a little bit. I guess I can go ahead and move that zoom down just slightly so I don't feel like I'm choking it out. All right, so now I have a rundown of all of the nodes that are active. And what I will often do is sort them so that way they're all in numerical order, so I'm not jumping around trying to figure out where they are. If you remember when we looked here in Sfall, we had these nodes at the very beginning, the script-specific nodes that we call. We saw up here in the declaration statements for script-specific procedure calls. Those are not going to be in order. Those are going to be kind of off by themselves. They start around node 900 and then they're put right up front because they're used for a lot of different things. I like to put those in numerical order here just to make life easier for me when I'm searching for things. And again, just get comfortable with the search function. So Control F will do that in most Windows-based things. So with that said, now let's take a look at the message. I'm going to go through, and from this list, because I've got all of this in numerical order, I'm going to go through and I'm going to create node listings for pretty much all of these. And where I can, I'm going to go ahead and put in my descriptions. You want to go ahead and make sure that you understand where you're coming from in terms of being able to create a pathway. Something that Austin likes and he's asked me to do is to find the greeting point. What is the initial point of introduction between you and this character? So I'm working on trying to figure out what exactly the situation is with Sulik, because I know where the low intelligence greeting is, but the standard intelligence greeting I'm going to have to kind of flex around and figure out, because his dialogue jumps around quite a bit. So I want to make sure that we're good with that. I want to make sure that I'm not breaking the original meat point, so that may require me digging in and finding a YouTube video or two to see where we're at. So with these nodes, once I've got them established, the character block obviously I'm not going to do anything with, because that's just flavor for me to be able to ref back to for my LVARs and all that stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that closed. I'm going to take a look at the description pproc. I'm going to use my level 1 formatting. Let me go ahead and show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go to View, Format. I'm going to go to Manage Styles. And this is how I've set up my nodes. I've only got 5 that I've custom defined, but I've got my big stuff here for my root node, and that's going to be at size 22 font. Level 1 through level 5 are all size 14. You can use whatever font you want. I like the bubble shape, smooth edged for my node. So these are standard. And then because these are all basically based on the parent, once I set the bubble here, it's going to be the same thing for nodes 1 through 5. I set the node flag, which is going to be the node text that we have here from the dot message, as being kind of this light yellow background with black text. I like it to be in bold, just makes it easier for me to see. Level 2 is going to be red. That's going to be Sulik's dialogue in this case, or NPC dialogue. Level 3 is going to be NPC dialogue it's PC dialogue that belongs to the player. Level 4 is going to be conditionals. Basically, these are instructions about what's causing the transition between these different nodes. And then level 5 I've reserved for debug statements. I might find something else I want to use, but for right now that's what it is. So if I set all these up and I go ahead and save them, Now, anytime I need to change something, I can go ahead and flip it over. So let's say that for whatever reason, I had accidentally set this particular piece of dialog to level 1. So now it automatically formats as being bold, yellow background, black text, but it's supposed to be dialog the player says. So I'm going to roll down to level 3, and boom. Now it's back to that light blue, black background. And if I go in to styles, again, if I go to manage styles, I could very easily go to edit styles, and now I can change level 1 to, instead of using the font that the parent uses, I could specify a different one here. That's just really kind of up to you. Let's say that for whatever reason I wanted to have level 2 be italic instead. I could go ahead and flex that, and if I save those styles, now you can see that any place I have style level 2 applied, it automatically updates. So I don't recommend trying to do this from a, don't do this individually. Set your format and then be able to use it. Go ahead and take what you need for that. All right, so I'm going to set that back to non-italic because I don't really like italic text unless it's something that's supposed to be like a comment or something that's not directly readable. If you use the control button with your mouse wheel, you can zoom in, or you can use the zoom drop box up here. I tend to keep it at about 50 to 60 just because these documents get incredibly long. Again, that's why I like to make sure that my nodes are all listed before I start going into subnodes. So before I got into this, and I'll zoom out to show you just how big this is, that's the scope of this thing at 7%. You can see the little bitty root node down here, and that's all the other dialogue and branching. So you see some of these get pretty long. And I know that some people prefer to do mind maps in more of a landscape style capacity. I don't necessarily arrange those very well. I find that FreePlane for some reason starts getting really messy looking if I do that. I also don't use connector lines in order to define where something loops back. I just list that target node so that you can identify where a potential changeover will be. So let me jump back to 100%. And I will show you a couple of variations that I've put into play to make my life a little bit simpler. Okay, so why do I have these ambiguous nodes over here? Okay, if I go over here to node 79, for instance, node 79 calls line 940. There's an intelligence test and 2 paths. Regardless of the 2 paths, you either end the dialogue or you continue on to node 80. So what I'm going to do here real quick is I'm going to go ahead and do Control X to cut. Make sure that you click and stay over it, because if you move the highlight, it will cut where your mouse is rather than from where it's supposed to go. I'm going to select these 2 nodes, just the N080, and hold Alt, Shift, Insert. And what that's going to do is give me this little, it's supposed to give me just a separated little area for it to go to. All right, well, that's fine. I will leave it as is. Obviously, the node for N999, as we've talked about twice now, is supposed to be the end dialog node. So node 80, the only place that this node 80 is called is in these 2 lines of dialogue. I'm going to call node 80 here, line 943, and then I'm going to come over here to node 80A. That's the only place that node 80A is called. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here, I'm going to type in 80 and see where it is. So there's 2 instances there, 2 instances there, 2 instances there, and it doesn't show up anywhere else in the listings. So over here on the left where my ambiguous nodes are, let's do the first one, N003. So I've got a reference here in node 1. I've got another reference here in node 76. I've got a reference in node 77, 78. So if it comes up anywhere more than once and they're not directly linked together, I will not do this chaining process where I get rid of these ambiguous nodes. So then 80A flows into 80B, and then 80B has several branches, but they only go to 2 separate nodes, 999 or 054. I've also put comments on here because it tells us what's actually happening. Here in node 80B, Sulik is asking you to look out for the farmer Tor, who is a bit of a simpleton and maybe in danger. So if you are also of low intelligence, you can do refuse or accept here. And then if you are of average or higher intelligence, then your acceptance or refusal is going to be down here. I believe I've got something a little bit messed up, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to line 952. Let me see. So 951 and 952 is to accept the search. Let me go ahead and copy over from this node. 953, that is to refuse to help him. So I'm going to paste that in there. And then I'm going to refuse to help Tor in 954 as well. So I'm basically, again, just adding commentary to make sure that we understand what the line is doing. Something else that you'll notice is the ability to expand and contract these nodes. I personally like to leave them open. So what I will do is once I've got everything done that I intend to get done, I go back to my main node here, my root, and I'm going to go ahead and hold the Shift key, and I'm going to press the right arrow one time. I'm going to right click and go down in this dialog box to where it says Always Unfolded Node, and I'm going to turn it off and then back on. And what that's going to do is it's going to turn on the expansion of each node to where it stays expanded regardless. Like I can go over here and click on the Minimize Node button, and it won't do it. Okay, so that's going to keep that open at all times. It makes it a little bit easier to be visible on what it's doing. So you'll see here that I've got level dependent stuff, node level here, level 1, that's good. On occasion I will have to right click and actually apply styles in order to make sure that the formatting is correct. So if I have level 4 for an if statement, that's going to show up here. If beyond that if or else I've got like dialog from Sulik, I can go ahead and put it in right here. Something I do like doing is to do what's called a node reset, make sure all of my positions are good. So I'm going to go ahead and do KC Sulik message. I'm going to hold Shift, press right, and then Control R. I can also go to Edit and go to Reset Node Position here. And what that's going to do is it's going to reassign the nodes as if I had just made them new. So that way if you have any weird overlaps or anything, you can clean those up. If you have custom positioning that you've done, make sure that you want to keep it that way and don't reset those nodes. You can select a particular branch and it will sort things out. There's another one that you want to be kind of careful of, and that's sorting children. So I'm going to show you this and then I'm going to undo it because it messes up my stuff right here. I've got a couple of different if statements that got messed up. So if I put the if up top, that's going to be where I want to start, and then I've got my else ifs. I'm also going to put the set first as well because the set probably needs to be done before anything else. And there I've got my else ifs. Okay, so if I were to go over here and right click and go to sort children, it'll do them alphabetically, which means the if statement gets put after the else ifs, and it no longer makes sense contextually. If you ever need to double check this, of course you can go back to the original Sfall script, slide that over to the right. I'm going to go to the talk pproc, scroll down here. You can also do it from the side, so if I just go to talk pproc, double click it. If I go down towards the middle here, you'll see where it's the lvar here before nested loop. Okay, so set var here before equal to 1, I've got that. gdialog, that's where you just initiate the talking head. If you've got critterstat IQ below the low IQ threshold, then you call node 1. So that's going to be right here. Basically, if your intelligence is less than 4, essentially saying that it's less than or equal to 3 is the same thing as saying less than 4, because less than or equal to includes 3. If you have slaver rep, that's right here. So I guess I could put that in the correct order. If gvar sulik free equals 0, that's the next one. If gvar sulik, this is an else. So the idea is that it's an else of the last conditional. If sulik is listed as not free here, and that's what the 0 would indicate, then that means that it must be free here. And that's a commentary that we have in this. Okay, so that would be that the 1 is the last conditional. Something else we want to be aware of, if it says if and then a variable but it doesn't tell you what the value is, assume it means false. Okay, so if it says else if gvar sulik free, assume that it means 0 or that it's not true. That's something I forgot about with C++. I'm used to it being if true with Java and some of the other languages I work with. But that's just a general rough and ready look over of this. I may re-record this. I may go ahead and put it together with a little bit more editing. Maybe I'll go ahead and take these little tips after I've written them down and then apply them to a shorter script as I'm doing it. All right. Thank you for listening.